The year is 1934, deep in the heart of Central Europe, where mountains pierce the winter clouds like broken teeth. There exists a legend not of ghosts or treasures, but of a man whose mind works like a Swiss watch, precise and relentless. His name is Olivier Marchand, a Belgian investigator whose reputation precedes him like a dark shadow. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a magnificent silver mustache that curves upward at the edges, the kind that takes 20 minutes each morning to perfect. Marchand moves through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who has never been wrong about a deduction. It is December 23rd when Marchand receives the telegram at his Vienna hotel. The message is brief, unsigned, and intriguing. Your presence requested. The Crimson Express departs tonight. Compartment A, Coach 3. Come alone. He smiles a thin, knowing smile that suggests he has been expecting the summons, though he couldn't possibly have known. He never could, yet somehow, he always does. The Crimson Express is not called that for its paint. It is called that because, over the past 18 months, 3 wealthy individuals have died aboard its routes through Eastern Europe, under circumstances so peculiar, so perfectly arranged, that the authorities have given up. The newspapers, however, have not. They call it a curse, a phantom, a murderer of extraordinary cunning. Marchand calls it an opportunity. The station at Vienna gleams with electric light, a monument to modernity trying desperately not to acknowledge the cold darkness, pressing in from every side. The Crimson Express sits at platform 7, a magnificent serpent of burgundy and gold, steam rising from its magnificent engines like the breath of some sleeping dragon. Marchand climbs aboard with a single leather case and the kind of serenity that unnerves people. His compartment is a study in luxury, velvet seats the color of wine, a small mahogany desk, a window that looks out onto the dying city lights. He sits, removes his coat with deliberate slowness, and folds it precisely over the chair. From his case, he retrieves a leather journal and a fountain pen. He writes a single line. The murderer is already aboard. One passenger, or perhaps all of them, outside. The locomotive whistles along, mournful sound that seems to contain a question. The train lurches forward with a metallic groan. Marchand watches Vienna recede into darkness, and he wonders who sent the telegram, and more importantly, what do they know about him that would make them believe he alone could solve what others could not? The rails beneath him begin their rhythm, clickety-clack. Clickety-clack, a heartbeat that will not stop until morning. By then, he thinks, someone aboard this train will be dead. The dining car is crowded that first evening, filled with the comfortable noise of wealthy travelers who see the train as an extension of their drawing rooms. Marchand studies each passenger with the attention a jeweler might give to a counterfeit gem, looking not at what they display, but at what they conceal. There's Count Victor Volkov, a Russian aristocrat with cold gray eyes and fingers that tremble when he lights his cigarettes. He claims to be traveling to Paris for investment purposes, but his suit, though expensive, has been worn for too long. The tailoring is from 3 seasons past. A man who once had money and is trying to maintain the appearance. Marchand notes this. He also notes that Volkov glances frequently toward the compartment of a young woman, a glance that combines desire with something darker. Fear, perhaps. The young woman is Miss Eleanor Ashford, English, wealthy, with the kind of beauty that seems calculated to draw eyes. She wears diamonds that catch the lamplight and throws them back at the room like accusations. There is something frozen about her smile. When she laughs, it sounds like porcelain striking marble. She travels with her elderly companion, Mrs. Beatrice Vale, a woman of perhaps 70 who speaks rarely and observes constantly. There's a quality of service in Mrs. Vale's attentiveness, yet she sits at Eleanor's table as an equal. Marchand wonders why. In the corner sits Dr. Henrik Rostov, a man of perhaps 60 with the gentle manner and weary eyes of a physician who has seen too much suffering. He carries with him an air of melancholy, and Marchand notices that his hands, when resting on the table, are stained with iodine, the mark of someone who still practices surgery. But there is something troubled about him. When the train jostles, he reaches for his seat as if the motion has thrown him into memory rather than toward the wall. Monsieur Jean-Claude Demet is a businessman from Lyon, round-faced and jovial, the sort of man who laughs loudly and drinks wine without restraint. He makes jokes in 3 languages, none of them particularly clever, yet his eyes are sharp and calculating. Marchand observes that when Dement believes no one is watching, his jovial mask slips away, and something bitter and cold takes its place. A salesman of something more than silk goods, Marchand suspects. There is also Father Anselm, a Jesuit priest whose collar seems at odds with the questioning nature of his gaze. He says grace before his meal with genuine piety, yet his hands are the hands of a laborer, not a contemplative. Marchand wonders, how many secrets does a Catholic priest hear in confession? And more importantly, how many of those secrets does he carry away when he steps down from the train? The final notable passenger is Sergei Kozlov, the train's chief conductor, a man with a military bearing despite his servant's uniform. He moves through the dining car with the precision of someone accustomed to command, rather than service. When he speaks, his Russian accent is thick, deliberate, or is it an affectation meant to disarm? Marchand makes a note, the conductor may not be who he claims. As the evening deepens and the train rattles through the mountain passes, Marchand excuses himself and retires to his compartment. He locks the door, retrieves his journal, and begins to write. Not deductions, not yet, but observations. The way Miss Ashford's jaw tightens when Dr. Rostov enters the dining car. The manner in which Monsieur Dement watches Father Anselm. The peculiar intimacy between Count Volkov and Mrs. Vale. A glance that passes between them like electricity. He writes, no one aboard this train is traveling for the reason they claim. No one is who they appear to be. And somewhere, in the dark outside this window, the answer waits like a predator, patient and certain. By midnight, Marchand is asleep, but his mind does not rest. He dreams of a mansion burning, of a child's scream, of blood on snow. When he wakes suddenly, completely, the train has stopped. There is silence so complete it seems like violence. The scream comes not from a throat, but from the machinery of the train, a grinding, shrieking sound as the brakes engage with emergency force. Marchand is on his feet before his eyes are open. He moves to the compartment door and opens it to find chaos in the narrow corridor. Father Anselm stumbles past, his nightclothes clutched around him, his face ashen. There's been an accident, I don't know, something has happened. The train is listing, suspended at an impossible angle. Through the window, Marchand sees the cause. A massive avalanche has swept across the tracks, carrying with it rocks the size of carriages. The Crimson Express is trapped, tilted, but not derailed, caught between the mountain pass like a bone in a throat. But this is not what concerns Marchand. What concerns him is the second scream, a woman's voice, sharp and cutting, coming from the first-class compartment 3 doors down. He moves with surprising speed for a man of his age, pushing past the gathering passengers. The compartment door is partially open. Inside, he finds the source of the chaos, Miss Eleanor Ashford, standing over a motionless form on the bed. The figure is Count Victor Volkov, and his throat has been opened with a wound so precise, so calculated that it looks almost surgical. Blood has pooled on the white sheets, like wine spilled across silk. Don't touch anything, Marchand says quietly. Eleanor staggers toward him, her eyes wide with shock. I came to ask for help. The avalanche. I wanted to know if we should prepare to evacuate. And I found him like this. I found him just like this. Her voice carries the ring of truth. Yet Marchand has long ago learned that the human voice is an instrument capable of playing any emotion with perfect fidelity. He steps into the compartment, careful not to disturb anything, and studies the body. Victor Volkov is dead perhaps an hour, perhaps only moments before the avalanche struck. His fingers still curl slightly, and his eyes stare upward as if reproaching the heavens for this indignity. Beside the bed lies an ornamental paperweight, its base still wet with blood. The weapon. Get everyone to the dining car, Marchand instructs the conductor, who has arrived now, his military bearing restored in the face of crisis. No one is to return to their compartments. No one is to leave the dining car. But sir, Sergei says, the avalanche, we should organize an evacuation. The avalanche has stopped us, Marchand says, and stopping is precisely what the murderer required. The avalanche is not an accident, Monsieur Kozlov. It is the conclusion to a plan that has been months, perhaps years in the making. As the passengers file past, march, and makes his observations, Eleanor Ashford is genuinely terrified. There is no artifice in that fear. Mrs. Vale is strangely calm, almost expectant. Dr. Rostov's hands shake as he passes. Monsieur Dement's face has gone gray. And Father Anselm moves like a man who has seen something he wishes desperately he had not. Marchand kneels beside the body and examines the wound closely. The cut is deep and certain, made by someone with knowledge of anatomy, someone who knew exactly where to place the blade to ensure quick death. He looks around the compartment and notices something that everyone else has missed. On the small table beside the bed lies a playing card, the Queen of Hearts, placed deliberately. In the center of the polished surface, Marchand picks it up, careful not to disturb any trace. A message, then. A signature. The murderer is not merely a killer, they are an artist with a message to convey. He places the card back precisely where he found it and whispers to himself, "The train is a cage. The murderer is trapped as we are trapped. And one of these 7 people, one of these 7 carefully chosen people has just begun to reveal who they truly are." The avalanche has buried more than snow round the train. It has buried the evidence of how anyone entered or left this compartment. The wounds in the snow are already being filled by fresh powder. By morning, there will be nothing to find outside, nothing but white emptiness and the sound of wind that seems to howl with knowledge. The dining car becomes their world. The windows show nothing but white, a world of absolute blankness that seems to press against the glass like a living thing. The electricity flickers. The avalanche has damaged the power lines, and they are lit now by the amber glow of oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on every wall. Marchand stands at the head of the table, his mustache catching the lamplight, his gray eyes moving from face to face with the concentration of a musician reading a score. Around him, the passengers sit in various states of distress and calculation. "I am Olivier Marchand," he says quietly. "I am a detective, retained by the railway to investigate security breaches. I am also the only person on this train qualified to conduct this investigation. Whether you cooperate or resist is, of course, your choice. But understand this, one of you is a murderer. One of you has killed Victor Volkov with a precision that suggests either professional training or intimate knowledge of human anatomy. The truth will emerge before we leave this dining car. We should contact the authorities." Monsieur Dement blurts. "We should inform them of this murder at once." The telegraph is down, Sergei informs them. The avalanche damaged the lines. We are, for now, completely isolated. A silence falls, heavy and suffocating as a burial shroud. Marchand takes a seat and folds his hands before him. "Let us begin with what we know. Count Victor Volkov was murdered between 11 o'clock last night and 2 o'clock this morning. The weapon is a paperweight from his own compartment. The method suggests knowledge of anatomical pressure points. The placement of a playing card, the Queen of Hearts, at the scene suggests either mockery or message. Who found the body?" Dr. Rostov asks. "Miss Eleanor Ashford discovered it when the avalanche struck, when she sought assistance regarding our situation," Marchand replies. Her alarm was genuine. Eleanor's face shows relief, quickly masked. "Now," Marchand continues, "each of you will tell me where you were between 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock this morning. And please, I would prefer honesty. Lies are far more easily detected than you might imagine. What unfolds over the next hours is a complicated tapestry of movement and stillness. Monsieur Dement was in his compartment, but his steward reports he left for a brief constitutional through the train around midnight. Mrs. Vale slept soundly in her compartment, though she is vague about whether she was truly asleep or merely pretending. Father Anselm was in his compartment, praying, though what man prays for 2 hours when a train contains a comfortable bed? Dr. Rostov admits to a walk through the train. He had insomnia, he claims, an old physician's curse, but his route through the train took him past Volkov's compartment. When Marchand asks if he saw anything unusual, the doctor hesitates for just a moment too long before saying no. Most intriguing is Sergei's account. He was performing his duties in the train's staff quarters, yet no one can corroborate this. And when Marchand asks him about his military bearing, about the nature of his service before becoming a conductor, Sergei's jaw tightens. but it is Father Anselm who provides the most fascinating clue. Almost by accident, when discussing his prayers, he mentions that he had observed, through his compartment door's small window, Eleanor Ashford moving through the corridor around midnight, not toward Volkov's compartment, but away from it. Eleanor becomes very still. I was restless. I took a walk, past the Count's compartment. Marchand asks gently, I may have. I wasn't paying attention to which direction I was walking. Mrs. Vale places a protective hand on Eleanor's arm, a gesture that reveals connection, though not necessarily innocence. As the second day on the isolated train progresses, Marchand notices that the passengers have begun to regard each other with increasing suspicion. The white world outside has not changed. No rescue is yet visible, and with each passing hour, the isolation seems to press harder, to squeeze secrets from places where they've been carefully hidden. Late that night, Marchand stands alone in the corridor, looking out at the white nothingness. Somewhere in this whiteness answers wait. Somewhere outside, in that blank expanse, lies the truth that will unlock everything. But the truth is not outside the train at all. The truth is here, in this metal prison, carried aboard by these 7 passengers like a disease. He thinks the murderer is patient. The murderer is in no rush. Indeed, the avalanche is perfected creates the very lockdown that ensures none of them can flee to report what they have done. The murderer is not trapped by the snow. The murderer is protected by it. Marchand begins his formal interviews on the morning of the second day of isolation. The storm outside shows no sign of diminishing. The telegraph remains down, and so the train and its secrets remain entirely in Marchand's domain. He meets first with Monsieur Jean-Claude Dement in a small service compartment, away from the main car. Dement's jovial manner has evaporated like morning dew. He is nervous, his fingers drumming against his leg with compulsive intensity. You were not in your compartment all night, Marchand opens. I told you I took a constitutional. At midnight, in a train where someone was about to die. Dement's face darkens. I did not know about any murder. I simply couldn't sleep. The rhythm of the train sometimes bothers me, and I walk to clear my mind. Near the Count's compartment, Marchand says, Father Anselm observed a woman in the corridor. He assumed it was Miss Ashford. But what if he was mistaken? What if it was someone else, dressed in dark clothing from behind, tall enough to be mistaken for Eleanor? Dement's breathing becomes shallow. That's preposterous, is it? You are a businessman in silk, monsieur, but your hands are scarred in ways that suggest a past in a different trade. Military, perhaps, or something less official. The sort of work where one learns how to handle a blade. I did not kill anyone, Dement insists, and yet you lie. About the time you left your compartment, about how long you were gone, about the reason for your inability to sleep. Marchand pauses. You knew Victor Volkov. You knew him well enough that his presence on this train caused you distress. Dement's face crumbles slightly. I knew him in Moscow, 15 years ago, before I changed my life. Go on. I was different then. Younger, we were involved in business that was not entirely legitimate. The Count was ruthless. He had no conscience. When I left that life, I thought I had escaped him. But 6 months ago, I received a letter. He had traced me. He demanded money, a great deal of money, for his silence about who I had been. He said if I did not pay, he would reveal everything to my wife, to my business partners. Marchand leans back. So you killed him? No. Dement's voice rises. No, by God, I did not. I was angry, yes. I wanted to refuse him, but I could not bring myself to do something as extreme as that. I walked because I was thinking about his letter, about the threat he posed. But I did not kill him. Marchand studies the man's face for a long moment. I believe you, he says finally. But understand, you are a man with motive, opportunity, and the physical capability to commit this murder. Until I can prove otherwise, you remain the primary suspect. The interview with Dr. Rostov proves more complex. The doctor is calm, controlled, the result of years managing suffering. But his hands shake when he accepts the coffee Marchand offers. You have performed surgery. Marchand observes. Your hands have that particular skill that comes only from years of cutting precisely. The wound that killed Volkov shows that same precision. Many people could make such a wound. Rostov replies, not many, not without hesitation, not without leaving signs of struggle. This was the work of someone who knew exactly where to cut, how deeply to cut, and had no fear of what would result. Rostov looks away. I was in the medical corps during the war. I learned surgery in field hospitals when we didn't have time for anesthesia. I performed amputations on screaming men. Yes, I know how to cut. He meets Marchand's eyes. But that knowledge was earned through suffering, monsieur. I did not murder anyone. And yet you took a walk through the train near the moment of death. I did. I could not sleep. The war gives me nightmares. When they come, movement helps. Tell me about Volkov. Rostov is silent for a long moment. I knew him, he finally says. Years ago. He was a minor official during the revolution. He was not a kind man. He hurt people without reason or provocation. But I did not know he was aboard this train until I saw him in the dining car. And by then it was too late to matter. Too late for what? Too late to change anything. Too late to undo the past. Mrs. Beatrice Vale proves to be a different sort of interview altogether. She sits across from Marchand with the composed dignity of a queen, her elderly hands folded in her lap. You are not Eleanor's companion, Marchand begins. You are something else. Family, perhaps, or something more intimate. Mrs. Vale smiles slightly. You are perceptive. Yes, I am Eleanor's mother. We have been estranged for 12 years, but we have recently reconciled. We are traveling together to Paris to begin anew. Why the pretense? Because society is cruel to women, Monsieur Marchand. If they knew we were mother and daughter, people would ask questions about why we were estranged, about Eleanor, about things that are not their business to know. And Volkov? What was he to you? Here, Mrs. Vale's composure falters slightly. He was a man who appeared in our lives years ago. He was dangerous and unprincipled. He caused great harm to Eleanor, to me, Mrs. Vale says quietly. He caused great harm to me, and my daughter was forced to witness that harm. When I discovered he was aboard this train, I did consider killing him. I considered it very seriously. She pauses. But in the end, I could not bring myself to do it. I am an old woman, monsieur. I have learned that some battles are not worth fighting. Eleanor Ashford is the most difficult interview. She sits before Marchand with visible tension, her fingers twisting a handkerchief into elaborate knots. The woman Father Anselm saw in the corridor, it was you, Marchand states. Yes. Why? Eleanor takes a shaky breath. I couldn't sleep either, but unlike the others, I didn't lie about why. I was afraid. I knew Volkov was aboard. My mother didn't know I knew, but I had recognized him in the dining car. He was someone from our past, someone who had hurt my mother very badly. I was afraid he would cause her pain again. So I walked because I needed to think. I walked past his compartment because I was wondering if I should do something about his presence. Do something? Kill him, no. Eleanor's voice rises. Just warn him away, or find a way to make him leave the train. But when I passed his compartment, I couldn't hear anything. Everything seemed quiet. So I kept walking. Did you see anything unusual? Eleanor hesitates. I heard something. Someone moving in the corridor. Behind me, I didn't see who. I thought perhaps one of the other passengers was also restless. I didn't think it important. Marchand leans forward. This is crucial, Miss Ashford. Can you describe the sound? The direction? Anything? It sounded like someone moving deliberately. Not a casual walk. Someone who knew where they were going. And I believe they were moving toward the Count's compartment. Father Anselm's interview is the shortest, but also the most revealing. The priest sits before Marchand with the serenity of a man who has confessed everything to God and carries lighter burdens as a result. You observed Miss Ashford in the corridor. Marchand says, I did, and yet you initially failed to mention this, because I was not certain it was relevant. The confession I hear in my role as a priest that knowledge is sacred. I thought perhaps I should allow Miss Ashford to reveal what she wished without my intervention. But you know something else. Something about the other passengers. Father Anselm nods slowly. This train carries a great many secrets, monsieur. Secrets that men and women carry like stones in their hearts. I cannot speak of what I have heard in the confessional, but I can tell you this. Victor Volkov was known to several people aboard this train. His presence affected each of them in different ways, and one of these people carried a burden of hatred so profound, so deep, that I feared for what they might do. Can you tell me who? I cannot, but I can tell you this. The Queen of Hearts is a playing card that suggests something specific. A woman, someone the murderer viewed as powerful or dangerous. A woman who needed to be eliminated. The final interview is with Sergei Kozlov. The conductor's military bearing has been fully restored, yet something has changed. There's a brittleness to him now, a sense of a man whose facade is beginning to crack. Your service, march, and begins. Tell me about it. Sergei's jaw tightens. I was in the Tsar's army. When the revolution came, I had to flee. I became a conductor to survive. There's no mystery here, is there not? You move through this train with the precision of someone trained in espionage. Your situational awareness is that of a military officer, not a servant. You are something more than a conductor. Perhaps I am simply a careful man, perhaps. Or perhaps you knew Viktor Volkov from before. From the war. From the revolution. Sergei becomes very still. I may have known of him, and when you saw him aboard this train, I did what any man would do. I made a decision about whether to acknowledge that past or let it lie, or prevent it from ever lying at all. Sergei meets Marchin's eyes, and for a moment, something ancient and bitter passes between them, the understanding between two men who have seen violence and had to carry it in silence. I did not kill him, Sergei says quietly, but I am not sorry that he is dead. As the evening of the second day approaches, Marchand has assembled a picture of 7 people, each connected to the dead man through threads of past trauma, financial desperation, or forgotten violence. Yet the picture refuses to cohere. Each suspect has motive, but none has certain opportunity. Each person had the capacity to commit the murder, yet none could be placed beyond doubt at the scene. That night, unable to sleep, Marchand walks through the train. The storm continues outside, unabated. The snow is piled up against the windows until the white world is the only world, a white universe that has replaced all others. In the observation car, he finds Father Anselm sitting alone, a rosary moving through the priest's fingers with meditative precision. You have been holding something back, Marchand says without preamble. Father Anselm looks up. Yes, tell me. The priest is silent for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper. I heard a scream last night. Not the scream that alerted the others, a different scream. Much earlier, around midnight, a woman's voice coming from Volkov's compartment. Marchand feels his pulse quicken. You did not mention this, because I made a confession afterward. Someone came to me and confessed something that was so terrible, so profound in its implications, that I could not bring myself to reveal their identity without first speaking to you. Who I cannot tell you their name, but I can tell you this. The person who confessed to me did not confess to murdering the Count. They confessed to something else, something that explains why he had to die. Marchand sits down heavily. You must tell me. I cannot violate the confessional, but I can advise you to look more carefully at connections between the passengers. Look at who knew whom before this train. Look at what binds them together beyond mere coincidence. The next morning brings an unexpected breakthrough. While conducting his continued investigation, Marchand discovers something overlooked in his first examination of Volkov's compartment. A small notebook hidden in a false panel beneath the mattress. The notebook contains dates, names, and amounts of money. It is a ledger of blackmail, a comprehensive record of every person aboard this train, and what the Count knew about them from Monsieur Dement. It notes, former operative for Russian intelligence, wife unaware, leverage, revelation would destroy marriage and business, for Dr. Rostov. It reads, doctor performed illegal operations during the war, possibly responsible for deaths of several patients. Leverage, medical board investigation would result in loss of license and imprisonment. For Mrs. Vale, a single line, responsible for the disappearance of a child. Evidence, letters, photographs. Leverage, criminal charges. For Eleanor Ashford, accomplice in embezzlement scheme. Father covered up. Leverage, family reputation and criminal charges. For Father Anselm, illegitimate child from before joining priesthood. Woman still living in Prague. Leverage, expulsion from church. For Sergei, executed Bolshevik officers during the Civil War. War crimes, leverage, international tribunal, and finally, for Eleanor again, a second notation, relationship with Mrs. Vale, if exposed, would reveal truth about her parentage and her mother's past. This is the leverage that matters most. Marchand sits with this information and suddenly understands. He understands why the Queen of Hearts was placed at the scene. He understands why the murder required such precision. He understands, finally, why each of these 7 people were aboard this train at this moment. He calls them all to the dining car just before noon. They arrive with varying degrees of apprehension. Eleanor and Mrs. Vale cling together. Monsieur Demon's face is gray. Dr. Rostov appears almost relieved, as if a judgment he has long awaited is finally arriving. Father Anselm carries his rosary. Sergei stands like a man before a firing squad. And the 8th person whom Marchand has called from the staff quarters is Marie Petrov, the train's chambermaid, a woman no older than 25, whose eyes burn with a hatred so profound it seems to illuminate the room. This woman, Marchand says, gesturing to Marie, is not simply a chambermaid. Her real name is Katerina Volkova. She is Viktor Volkov's daughter. The room erupts in shock and denial, but Marchand raises his hand. Quiet, let me explain. Katerina's mother was a Russian woman named Isabel. Isabel was the woman who disappeared 12 years ago, while under the care of Mrs. Beatrice Vale in St. Petersburg, the woman whose disappearance led to investigations, suspicions, and eventually, a closed case that raised more questions than it answered. Mrs. Vale has gone white. Eleanor holds her hand. Isabel did not die, Marchand continues. She gave birth to a daughter, Katerina, in secret. Her disappearance was engineered by her family, who paid significant sums to make it appear she had simply vanished. What actually happened was far more complicated. Isabel went into hiding, ashamed and heartbroken. She took her own life 5 years ago, leaving Katerina with nothing but rage and unanswered questions. He turns to Katerina. You applied for work on this train because you knew your father would be aboard. You have been planning his death for months. You even introduced yourself to him your first day as a chambermaid, and he did not recognize you. Your own father did not recognize his own daughter. Katerina's face is a mask of tears and fury. He destroyed my mother. He abandoned her when she told him she was pregnant. He refused to acknowledge me. And then, when he finally learned I existed, he tried to use my very existence as leverage for his blackmail schemes. He was planning to tell people his daughter was working on his precious train, as if it reflected well on him, as if he had any claim on me at all. You killed him, Marchand says quietly. I did, Katerina says, and there is something almost peaceful in her admission. I lured him into conversation, the night before last, under the pretense of bringing fresh linens. I told him who I was. I told him about his wife, yes. His wife in Vienna doesn't even know he has a daughter out of wedlock. I told him I was going to expose everything, his affairs, his illegitimate children, his blackmail operations. He reached for the panic button, and I knew at that moment that I had to act. Marchand watches the room carefully. You took the paperweight from his desk. He kept it prominent because it had been a gift from someone he valued. You forced him to listen to what you had to say about your mother. And then when he tried to call for help, you struck. The cut was not a strike born of rage. It was precise, calculated. The work of someone who learned anatomy not from books, but from watching her mother suffer slowly, from a poisoned heart. How did you know? Katerina whispers. Because you left something behind, something your father would have left behind in any case. The Queen of Hearts is not a random playing card. It is what you called yourself, is it not? In the underground gambling houses of Prague, where your mother worked the card tables to earn money to keep you alive. She was known as the Queen, beautiful, dangerous, and powerful. You placed that card at the scene to honor her memory. Katerina sinks into a chair, her confession complete. But Marchand is not finished. Marchand continues, his voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade through silk. This investigation has revealed something far more complex than a simple murder by a wrong daughter seeking vengeance. You see, while Katerina Volkova confessed to the act of killing her father, she did not act alone. More precisely, she could not have committed this murder without assistance from someone aboard this train, someone with knowledge, with motivation, and with the opportunity to ensure that the scene would be discovered in a manner that led investigators down a particular path. He pauses, allowing this revelation to settle over the room like ash. When I examined Volkov's compartment, I found not one set of fingerprints on the paperweight, but two. The first set, belonging to Katerina, was clear and confident, the prints of someone who had handled the weapon deliberately. But the second set, smudged and partial, belonged to someone else, someone who had handled the paperweight earlier in the evening. All eyes turned toward each other, searching for guilt written on faces. I suspected at first that this indicated to separate murderers, but that theory proved untenable. Two people could not have killed Volkov without leaving signs of struggle. So instead, I began to wonder, what if the second set of prints belonged to someone who knew what Katerina intended to do and chose to facilitate it rather than prevent it? Marchand's gaze settles on Dr. Henrik Rostov. The doctor's face crumbles. "Doctor," Marchand says gently, "you treated Isabel Volkova, did you not? Before she disappeared?" Rostov nods slowly. "I did. I was a young physician then, working in St. Petersburg. I attended her during her pregnancy. I delivered Katerina. I was one of the few people who knew the truth about what happened. And when you saw Katerina aboard this train, you recognized her." "I did. I knew who she was, what she carried inside her. The hatred, the need for justice. You did more than recognize her. You encouraged her. You provided her with the information she needed, particularly about your own situation, about the blackmail that Volkov held over you. You told her that her father was a man who deserved no mercy, that killing him would be an act of justice rather than murder." Rostov stands. Yes, I did. Because it was true. Because Volkov was a parasite who fed on the suffering of others. Because he had no right to live while Isabel, a good woman, a kind woman, took her own life because of his cruelty. You gave Katerina access to Volkov's compartment through your connections to the medical staff. You ensured that the paperweight which you had previously handled while treating Volkov for a minor injury would provide ambiguous evidence. And you said nothing, even when you saw an opportunity to expose her, because you believed in what she had done. "I did," Rostov says, his voice steady now. "I believed then, and I believe now. Some murders are justice. Some murders are the only possible response to a world that refuses to punish evil. Through legitimate means, the room is utterly silent. But here is where the truth becomes even more intricate," Marchand says. "Because while Dr. Rostov facilitated Katerina's revenge, he was not acting out of pure principle. He was acting out of a different kind of desperation." He turns to face Monsieur Jean-Claude Demet. "Monsieur Demet, you were not simply being blackmailed by Volkov. You were being blackmailed by someone else as well, someone who had discovered your past and was using it to force you to remain silent about what you knew regarding Dr. Rostov and Katerina's history. That someone was Father Anselm." The priest rises to his feet. "That is not—" "Sit down," Marchand says, not unkindly. "You discovered the connection between the doctor and Katerina through your confessional duties. You heard Dr. Rostov speak of his past, of his guilt regarding Isabel's death, of his belief that Volkov deserved punishment. You also heard Katerina's confession when she came to you before the murder, seeking absolution for what she intended to do. You were placed in an impossible position, bound by the sanctity of confession, yet aware that a murder was about to occur. How could I betray the confessional?" Father Anselm asks, his voice anguished. "How could I reveal what had been told to me in sacred confidence?" "You could not," Marchand agrees. "So instead, you made a choice. You chose to ensure that if the murder occurred, it would be discovered in a manner that would lead to confusion rather than immediate resolution. You enlisted Monsieur Demet, using the knowledge you possessed about his past, to ensure that evidence would be contaminated, that the timeline would be obscured, that multiple suspects would appear equally guilty." Demet looks as though he might speak, but Marchand continues. "You orchestrated small things, a brief conversation with the conductor about maintenance schedules, a casual remark about seeing lights on in various compartments at odd hours, a suggestion that the avalanche might have been deliberately engineered, a ridiculous idea, but one that introduced doubt into the investigation from the outset. Why would I do such a thing? Father Anselm asks, though his face suggests he already knows. Because you believed, as Dr. Rostov believed, that Volkov was a man whose death served a higher justice. Because you had been a soldier before you became a priest, and soldiers understand that sometimes the rules of law must bend before the demands of morality. And because you were protecting your own secret, March and produces a second notebook from his pocket, not Volkov's ledger, but a personal journal found hidden in Father Anselm's compartment. In this journal, you document your struggle with your vow of celibacy. You describe, in great detail, your love for a woman in Prague, a woman you abandoned when you joined the priesthood, a woman who bore a son, a child who does not know you are his father. Volkov had discovered this. He was planning to expose it. You could not allow that to happen, both because of the shame it would bring upon the church, and because you could not bear to see the woman you love subjected to public scrutiny. Father Anselm sinks back into his chair, his hands covering his face, and then Marchand says, turning to address the entire room, "There's the matter of Mrs. Beatrice Vale and Miss Eleanor." Ashford. Eleanor becomes rigid. Mrs. Vale's hand finds hers and squeezes it. I initially believed the notation about Eleanor's embezzlement was the primary leverage Volkov held over the Vale family, but upon further investigation, I discovered the truth. Eleanor did not embezzle. Her father did. Eleanor took responsibility for the crime to protect him, and Volkov knew this. Eleanor's eyes widened with shock. How could you possibly know that? Because I investigated your father's financial records. Because I discovered that Eleanor, at age 17, confessed to a crime she could not possibly have committed. The timing was wrong. Her access to the accounts was wrong. Everything about her confession was demonstrably false. She took the blame to protect her father's reputation. Your father covered up the investigation through bribes and influence. Volkov discovered this cover-up and used it as leverage not only against Eleanor, but against your entire family's standing. Mrs. Vale's face is pale. We didn't know he knew. We thought we had protected her. You did the best you could, Marchand says gently. But Volkov was a man with an instinct for ferreting out secrets. He found yours, and you, Mrs. Vale, understood that his silence could be purchased only through continued payment. You were being bled dry by his blackmail. He pauses, allowing this confession to settle. But there is more. Volkov's greatest leverage over you was not the embezzlement at all. It was the notation about Eleanor's true parentage. Eleanor is not your biological daughter, is she? The room draws in a collective breath. Mrs. Vale does not respond, but her silence is answer enough. Eleanor is the daughter of Isabel Volkova, Marchand says quietly. The woman who gave birth to Katerina was also the woman who gave birth to Eleanor. Before she ran away with Katerina, Isabel gave birth to another child, Eleanor, and left her in your care. You adopted her, loved her, and raised her as your own. But Volkov discovered this secret as well. He discovered that his legitimate daughter was traveling aboard this train with a half-sister he never knew existed. Eleanor is trembling. Mrs. Vale holds her close. This changes nothing. Mrs. Vale says fiercely, Eleanor is my daughter in every way that matters. I know, Marchand says, and I believe you would have done anything to protect that secret, including allowing a murderer to go free, if it meant keeping Eleanor's true origins hidden. He turns back to the assembled group, and so we arrive at the final truth. This train carried not merely a murderer, but a conspiracy of circumstance, a convergence of damaged people, each carrying secrets, each bound by connections to a man who trafficked in those secrets like a merchant of misery. Katerina Volkova killed her father because he had destroyed her mother. Dr. Rostov facilitated that murder because he carried guilt for that same mother's fate. Father Anselm obscured the evidence because he was bound by confession and by his own secrets. Monsieur Dement participated in the cover-up because he was blackmailed into silence. And Mrs. Vale and Eleanor, he pauses, looking at them with something approaching compassion. And Mrs. Vale and Eleanor knew or suspected what had occurred, and chose to remain silent because the truth would have exposed Eleanor's parentage and shattered the family they had built together. The avalanche, which seemed like catastrophe, was in fact perfect fortune for those involved in Volkov's death. It created the isolation necessary for a murder to go undiscovered. It created the conditions for confusion, multiple suspects, obscured timelines, evidence that became increasingly difficult to authenticate as the hours passed. Marchand stands before the assembled group now as night falls on the third day of their isolation. Outside, miraculously, the snow has begun to ease. The rescue train is visible in the distance, working to clear the tracks. By morning, they will be able to leave. I have reconstructed the night of the murder with reasonable certainty, Marchand announces. At 10 o'clock, Dr. Rostov came to Katerina under the pretense of examining her for a minor complaint. In reality, he gave her a key to Volkov's compartment, a key obtained from Sergei Kozlov, who possessed it as part of his duties. Sergei nods slightly. I did not know what she intended to do with it. Perhaps not, Marchand says, though your military bearing suggests you understood the general nature of her intentions. At 11 o'clock, Katerina entered Volkov's compartment. She had prepared what she would say, how she would confront him with the truth of her identity. Volkov's initial response was not what she expected. He felt not shame, but pride that he had a daughter. This enraged her further. She demanded that he acknowledge Isabel, that he make restitution for the suffering he had caused. He refused. Marchand walks slowly through the dining car as he speaks, painting the scene with his words. When Volkov tried to summon help, Katerina took the paperweight, an object she had deliberately chosen days earlier, and struck him. The blow was placed with precision, because Dr. Rostov had coached her in the anatomy of the human throat, in the placement of a cut that would be swift and certain. He had taught her where to strike, not to prolong suffering, but to ensure quick death. A mercy, in his view, though also a signature. He continues. Eleanor Ashford, unable to sleep due to her anxiety about Volkov's presence aboard the train, walked the corridors. She passed near his compartment around midnight, just as Katerina was leaving. Eleanor did not see Katerina clearly, only a figure in the darkness. Father Anselm, also unable to sleep, observed Eleanor's movements and later that night discovered Katerina in the staff quarters, covered with blood. Why did you not immediately alert the authorities? Marchand asks Father Anselm. Because she came to me and confessed, the priest replies. She confessed in the manner of a penitent seeking absolution. I was bound by sacred obligation to receive that confession. I could not and would not break the seal of the confessional. So instead, you manipulated the evidence. You spoke with Dr. Rostov, who had already begun to feel the weight of what he had facilitated. Together, you devised a plan to obscure the truth. You enlisted Father Anselm's influence to convince Monsieur Dement that his own past associations made him vulnerable, that he should remain silent about what he might have observed or suspected. Marchand returns to his seat at the head of the table. Dr. Rostov deliberately placed his own fingerprints on the paperweight, ensuring that when it was found, there would be evidence suggesting his involvement, but evidence ambiguous enough that it could not prove guilt beyond doubt. The competing stories, the overlapping timelines, the multiple people with motive and opportunity, all of this was orchestrated to create reasonable doubt. It was a masterwork of subtle misdirection, he concludes. Each person involved added a layer of complexity. Each person involved believed they were serving justice, and each person involved was willing to let me investigate without revealing the full truth. How did you know? Dr. Rostov asks. How did you see through all of this? Marchand is quiet for a moment before answering. Because I have spent my entire life studying the ways in which people reveal themselves. Through the stories they tell, I listened not only to what was said, but to what was emphasized and what was omitted. I observed not only the words, but the silences that surrounded them. Eleanor emphasized that she had been walking, but did not explain why she had been so anxious about Volkov's presence. Mrs. Vale was too protective of Eleanor, suggesting an additional secret beyond simple maternal love. Dr. Rostov was too resigned, as if he had accepted judgment before trial, and Father Anselm was too eager to suggest that a murder could be justified by circumstance. He pauses, but most importantly, I discovered the truth through understanding human nature. I understood that Volkov was a man who lived by exploiting secrets. I understood that those who carried the most dangerous secrets would be motivated to silence him. And I understood that in this case, justice and murder had become almost indistinguishable, not in law, but in the hearts of those involved. As night deepens into the early hours of the fourth day, Marchand sits alone in his compartment. The journal lies open before him, not Volkov's ledger of blackmail, but his own private record of this investigation. He has written out the facts, the deductions, the chain of reasoning that led him to the truth. But now he faces a question that no amount of logical deduction can answer. The telegraph has been repaired. He can, at any moment, send a message to the authorities detailing exactly what occurred. He can name Katerina Volkova as a murderer. He can describe the conspiracy of silence that followed. He can ensure that justice, in the legal sense, is served. And yet, he thinks of Isabel Volkova, who took her own life because of Volkov's cruelty. He thinks of Katerina, a child born in secret shame, forced to watch her mother waste away from heartbreak. He thinks of Dr. Rostov, who had spent a lifetime carrying guilt for a tragedy he could not prevent. He thinks of Eleanor, who had sacrificed her own reputation to protect her father, only to discover that even that sacrifice was insufficient to shield her from Volkov's malice. He thinks of Father Anselm, who had violated his own priestly duty to his conscience by protecting a confession made not in a confessional but in a compartment, by a woman seeking not absolution but understanding. He thinks of all of them, and he understands something that legal systems never quite manage, that guilt is not a simple thing, that sometimes the murderer is the victim, that sometimes justice and injustice are not opposites, but are intertwined so completely that separating them becomes a philosophical impossibility. In the morning, the rescue train arrives. The tracks are cleared. The Crimson Express is freed from the avalanche's grip. Marchand stands on the platform as passengers begin to disembark. Katerina is the last to leave. She carries a single small case and walks with the quiet dignity of someone who has made peace with their own actions. She does not look back at the train. Dr. Rostov approaches Marchand as the detective prepares to make his official report. "What will you tell them?" the doctor asks. Marchand does not answer immediately. Instead, he removes the Queen of Hearts from his pocket. He examines it for a moment, then hands it to Dr. Rostov. "I will tell them," Marchand says finally, "that Viktor Volkov was killed by an unknown assailant, that the evidence is insufficient to determine guilt with certainty, that there are several viable suspects, each with motive and opportunity, but none whose involvement can be proven beyond reasonable doubt. I will note that the playing card suggests a killer with knowledge of symbolism, someone connected to the victim through intimate betrayal, and I will recommend that the case be closed as unsolved. Another tragedy aboard a train where murder seems to travel like a passenger, boarding without ticket and departing without farewell." Dr. Rostov's eyes widen with understanding and gratitude. "You could have told them," the doctor says. "You have the evidence. You have the confessions, implicit and explicit." "I could have," Marchand agrees, "but I have learned something in the course of this investigation that surprised even me. I have learned that sometimes the most intelligent course of action is not to expose every truth, but to recognize when the pursuit of legal justice would cause greater injustice than allowing a certain measure of ambiguity to persist." He pauses, looking back at the train, the magnificent, terrible Crimson Express that carried all these damaged people to their moment of reckoning. Viktor Volkov was a man who trafficked in secrets. He believed that secrets were weapons, that knowledge was power, that truth was something to be weaponized. But I have come to believe that he was wrong. Some truths, when exposed, do not illuminate, they destroy. Some secrets, when revealed, do not liberate, they imprison. The question facing any investigator is not whether truth can be discovered, but whether truth, once discovered, serves justice or merely perpetuates cruelty. 3 months later, Marchand sits in his Vienna apartment. The case of Viktor Volkov's murder remains officially unsolved. The newspapers have moved on to other sensations. Life, in its peculiar way, continues as if the murder never happened. But Marchand knows better. He has received letters. The first came from Katerina, posted from Prague. She has opened a small shop selling books and antiquities. She writes that she feels, for the first time since her mother's death, as though she can breathe. She thanks him, though they both understand that his silence was not an act of mercy toward her, but an act of Justice toward all those involved. Dr. Rostov has returned to his medical practice. He has stopped taking the medication that was slowly poisoning him, the physical manifestation of his guilt. He writes that he feels lighter, as though a burden has been lifted. He does not ask why March and remains silent. He understands Father Anselm has been transferred to a new parish in the mountains of Switzerland. His letter contains no words, only a prayer that March and does not quite understand, but somehow recognizes as gratitude. Eleanor and Mrs. Vale have settled in Paris, where they have opened a small gallery of antiquities. Mother and daughter, a relationship more complex than blood suggests, but more genuine than most. Eleanor writes that she is happy, that she has stopped looking over her shoulder, waiting for Volkov's secrets to pursue her into the future. Even Monsieur Demet has found peace. He has written that his wife has learned the truth about his past, and she has chosen to remain with him. They are working together to build a legitimate business, leaving the shadows behind. He thanks Marchand for his silence, understanding that exposure would have destroyed not only him but an innocent woman as well. Now, on a winter evening much like the one that began his journey aboard the Crimson Express, Marchand sits at his desk and opens his journal to make a final entry. He writes, "The question that has haunted me since leaving that train is not what is justice, but rather is justice always merciful? I believed once that the role of an investigator was to reveal truth, whatever that truth might be, and to allow the legal system to do what it was designed to do. I believed that my job ended with the discovery of facts and the presentation of evidence. But investigation is not so simple. Investigation is not a pure pursuit of truth. It is a complex negotiation between truth and its consequences. It is an understanding that some truths, when exposed, do more harm than good. It is a recognition that the legal system, for all its noble intentions, sometimes operates according to principles that are not aligned with mercy. Viktor Volkov was a man who lived by a simple principle, that information is power, and power is everything. He believed that by knowing others' secrets, he could control them. He was wrong. What he discovered was that knowledge without compassion is a form of cruelty. What he failed to understand was that some people will kill to protect not themselves, but those they love. Katerina Volkova killed her father not because she was a murderer, but because she was a daughter seeking justice for a mother whose suffering ended only in death. Dr. Rostov facilitated that murder not because he was a criminal, but because he was a man trying to balance the scales of a tragedy he could not prevent. Father Anselm obscured the evidence not because he was corrupt, but because he was bound by obligations that superseded legal obligation. I allowed them all to go free because I came to understand that the world contains more truth than the law can accommodate, that sometimes the greatest wisdom lies not in revelation, but in discretion, that sometimes the most intelligent thing an investigator can do is recognize when further investigation would not serve justice, but would merely create more victims. I do not know if I have done the right thing. I may have violated my professional obligations. I may have obstructed justice. I may have betrayed the principles that guided my entire career. But I have also learned that principles, like facts, must sometimes yield to wisdom. And wisdom begins when we recognize that the world is not merely a puzzle to be solved, but a tragedy to be navigated with compassion. This case is closed, not because I have solved it, but because some mysteries are deeper than investigation can penetrate. Some truths are too dangerous to tell, and sometimes the greatest victory is not the exposure of evil, but the recognition that evil, too, is often born from suffering, and that compassion is sometimes the only justice that heals rather than perpetuates. Marchand closes his journal. He pours himself a glass of whiskey and stands at the window, looking out over Vienna in the winter darkness. The city is frozen, locked in ice, yet underneath the surface, life continues hidden, complex, demanding of mercy. He thinks of the Crimson Express, still running its routes across Europe, still carrying passengers and secrets, still providing a canvas for human tragedy. Somewhere aboard that train right now, he thinks, another drama is unfolding. Another murderer is planning. Another victim is unaware of their fate. And yet, as the lights of Vienna twinkle like stars beneath him, Marchand feels something approaching peace. He has made his choice. He He has looked into the abyss of human suffering and recognized it not as something to be exposed and punished, but as something to be understood and, where possible, healed. The mustache, as always, remains perfectly waxed, curving upward at the edges with mathematical precision. But the man beneath it has changed. He has become someone wiser, if not necessarily better, someone who understands that justice is not always the highest good, that truth is not always merciful, and that sometimes the greatest detective work lies not in solving mysteries, but in knowing when to leave them unsolved. In the distance, a train whistle sounds long, mournful, questioning. The Crimson Express, perhaps, beginning another journey. And Marchand, standing alone in his Vienna apartment, wonders if somewhere aboard that train, another detective is learning the lessons he has learned. Another investigator is discovering that the pursuit of truth can be a path either to justice or to cruelty, and that the difference between them is often a matter not of facts, but of faith. He turns from the window and sits once more at his desk. He picks up his pen and writes a single line in his journal. The truth is not always the best investigation can provide. Sometimes wisdom is, and with that, the case is truly closed. Not solved, but concluded. Not finished, but ended. Leaving behind only questions, only shadows. Only the faint echo of a woman's scream aboard a train that carries not murders, but mysteries. The kind that cannot be prosecuted in courts, but only understood in the human heart. The Crimson Express disappears into the European darkness, and Olivier Marchand, the brilliant, eccentric Belgian investigator with the magnificent silver mustache, remains in Vienna, waiting for the next case, the next mystery that will test not his deductive powers, but his humanity. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Not what happened aboard the Crimson Express, but whether exposing truth always serves justice, or whether sometimes true wisdom lies in the merciful silence of an unsolved crime.